I'm going to be talking to Rob Gramlich, who's the Executive Director of Americans for a Clean Energy Grid, about a Department of Energy announcement about funding for a clean energy grid. So welcome to the interview, Rob.
Thanks, Markham. Good to be with you.
Well, maybe you can start with an overview of the announcement, if you would mind, please.
Sure. Well, it's a collection of areas where the Department of Energy intends to deploy transmission and use all of the tools at their disposal to do that. Now, they don't have, broad, unlimited authority to just make transmission happen. What they do have is a collection of loan guarantees, financing mechanisms, some permitting authority, and some other tools. So what they did is they put these all together, and they said we're gonna assemble these together and try to use all of them, use any tool at our disposal to move transmission forward. They didn't use the term grid deployment authority, which has been thrown around Washington for quite a while, but to me it feels like the same thing, where they're taking their tools and they're putting them together to move transmission forward.
Oh, and just to provide a little context, I guess the president President Joe Biden has committed to net zero by 2050 for the electricity grid. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, and in the U.S., you've got these regional planning organizations around your electricity system, and there's a lot more emphasis on markets, for instance, than there is in Canada. And being able to move that electricity around and balance it out with intermittent electricity is a key part of the decarbonization of the grid, correct?
Correct. And I think this announcement absolutely reflects that the Biden administration views transmission as critical to clean energy goals, which of course is what most researchers are saying and what most environmental groups and utilities and people across the power sector are now saying or realizing. And so this is, I think, important leadership from the administration.
Okay, how much funding are we talking about, and is it enough to get the job done?
Yeah, not that much in the scope of transmission, not that much funding, and no, not really near what you need to really get the job done. Every little bit helps, and nobody wants to bite the hand that feeds them. But the infrastructure bill had this program we like a lot called the Transmission Facilitation Program, where the government can sort of serve as an anchor tenant and take capacity contracts on transmission. That's helpful, but it's only $2.5 billion. And if you think about, these transmission lines that can cost a couple $1 billion each, maybe they're helping a few lines with that program. It is a revolving fund. So if one company, pays it back, then they have more money for the next one that comes along. But still, that's not transformative really by itself in the power sector. And there's some other programs around that have a few billion here and a few billion there. But some of that is for resilience and upgrading existing wires, maybe making them stronger and less prone to wildfires or high winds, et cetera. So not all of it is for new lines. So the amount for new lines thus far is really single-digit billions, and we're already spending $20 billion a year nationally on transmission. So that's not a huge amount. Hopefully, if the Build Back Better Act passes, which is the bill that's at this point still waiting in Congress, that has a tax credit for regionally significant transmission, and that would be a much bigger deal.
How much money will it take to do the job properly?
Well, the cost of building a full national or potentially continental macro grid is probably north of $200 billion. Now, ratepayers can pick up a big share of that, not necessarily taxpayers, right? And FERC has a big job on its hands to try to figure out which ratepayers and where, and how do you plan the transmission and assign the costs. But somehow that can be done. But some significant help from taxpayers and the federal government, I think would help a great deal to make these endless cost allocation battles, somewhat easier. So, I would have loved to have seen something north of 50 billion in these bills, the climate bill, the infrastructure bill, but it looks like it's closer to sort of 10 to 20 range.
And what will be the role of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in, facilitating all of this investment in transmission?
Yeah, well, they will have a big role for planning and cost allocation of transmission. A very significant rulemaking is before the agency right now. It's called the Advanced Notice of Proposed Rule, and hopefully that becomes a proposed rule very shortly here. And so they have a lot of authority that they've not used yet to do that, and that is the biggest barrier, is to get the lines planned and allocate the costs. We have siting challenges as well, but there's other ways to handle that, and we still have a decent batting average on getting lines permitted once they're planned appropriately and people agree with who pays how much. So FERC's initiative will be critical, and part of this interaction between the Department of Energy is DOE has some money for planning, meaning studies and engaging states and stakeholders, and that's very helpful. Once those studies and hopefully some types of consensus come out, then FERC can take that and put it into their more formal tariff process in terms of who pays how much. So there is a handoff here between the two agencies.
Rob, thank you very much. We'll check back with you when the Build Back Better legislation passes, assuming it does, and we'll see what we'll talk about that investment tax credit.
Sounds good, Markham. Take care.